You ever have one of those moments where you realize just how good something was and you can't believe how much you took it for granted back then? Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about the PS2. Let me ask you something though, what makes the gaming console truly legendary? Is it the library of games, the impact it had on the gaming industry, or maybe it's the memories tied to it? For me, the PS2 is all that and more. It's a console that didn't just dominate its time, but it defined it. Now, I didn't get my hands on the PS2 right when it launched in 2000. I mean, I wasn't born yet, but my first experience with the console came much later, in 2007. Yeah, 2007. By then, the PS3 was already out and everyone was already talking about the new generation of consoles. But let me tell you, none of that mattered when I finally got my PS2. Even with the PS3 making waves, the PS2 was still alive and kicking, and honestly, it felt like I was stepping into an entirely new world of gaming. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why the PS2 deserves its title as the best-selling console of all time. I'm also going to share my personal experiences with it and break down the most iconic games that shaped my love for gaming and explain how the PS2 changed the industry forever. So whether you're a longtime fan of the console or someone curious about what made it so special, stick around. Let's start with the console itself, because honestly, this thing was a game changer. If you were around in the early 2000s, you know exactly how huge this was. Sony was really out here changing the whole game. The PS2 wasn't just another console, it was the console. This thing was everywhere. Your friend's house, your cousin's house, heck, even your own house if you were lucky. It wasn't just about the games either, it was about the experience. It was the first system that really felt like it brought a level of sophistication to gaming. I mean, they weren't messing around. The design, clean, not too flashy, but it just worked. The PS2 didn't need to scream for attention like other consoles. And let's talk about the controller. It wasn't too big, it wasn't too small, just the right size for your hands to feel comfortable, especially after a long gaming session. It was basically flawless for its time. Besides the looks, the PS2 had a solid library from the jump. Another thing that made the PS2 special was how easy it was to pick up and play. There was no complicated setup. Just plug it in, pop in a disc, and you were good to go. I remember the simplicity of it being such a relief. There wasn't any waiting for updates or dealing with patches. It was just pure, uninterrupted gaming. And honestly, that kind of simplicity is something I miss in today's consoles. Not saying they're bad, but like, they could be a lot better than what they are. So yeah, like I said earlier, the PS2 wasn't just a console, it was the console. It was reliable, accessible, and packed with potential. Whether you were a hardcore gamer or just someone who wanted to play for fun, the PS2 delivered. It didn't try to be anything more than what it was, and that's what made it so timeless. Now let's get into my personal experiences with the console. When I got my PS2 in 2007, it felt like Christmas came early. I had already seen my friends play on theirs, and I was itching to have my own. When I finally got it, I couldn't believe how much I've been missing out on. The PS2 felt like it had everything I needed. One of my earliest memories was setting it up in my room and playing for hours on it. Now, I didn't have a massive game library right away, but the games I did have were unforgettable, which I'm going to get into in a second. But each one felt like its own adventure. I wasn't just playing games, I was making memories that I still look back on today. What stood out to me the most was how easy it was to lose track of time. I would start playing as soon as I got home from school, and before I knew it, the sun had already set, and I was still glued to the screen. It didn't matter what kind of day I had. The PS2 was always my escape. Another thing I'll never forget is how the PS2 brought people together. My siblings and I would sit in the same room passing the controller back and forth, cheering each other on, or laughing at some epic fails. Even today, when I think about the PS2, it's not just about the games that come to mind. It's the joy of discovering something new, the excitement of being a tough level, and the simple pleasure of just having fun. The PS2 wasn't just a console for me, it was a part of my childhood, and I think that's why it holds a special place in my heart. With that said, let's get into the games. First off, we have Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Man, this game was something else. I didn't fully understand how revolutionary this game was when I first played it, but I definitely felt the impact. I remember getting my hands on it when I was a little older and finally being able to appreciate what it had to offer. I'd seen people talk about the series before, but when I actually played it, I realized it wasn't just a game, it was a whole experience. And I don't say that lightly. The first time that I saw Snake on that oil tanker, I knew I was in for something different. Now the gameplay mechanics were unlike anything I played before. I was used to the action-packed run-and-gun style games, but Metal Gear Solid 2 was all about stealth. And man, let me tell you, stealth wasn't always easy for me. I'll never forget the time where I got caught sneaking past the guard and had to restart from the last checkpoint. Especially when you had to sneak around trying to get pictures of Metal Gear Ray for Otacon. The tension that came with trying to stay hidden in the shadows, knowing that if you messed up, the game was over, was something I never had felt in a game before. It really made you think twice before every move. And let's not forget about the cutscenes. Metal Gear Solid 2 took cinematic storytelling to a whole new level. The long, intense cutscenes felt like mini movies, and I remember just sitting there glued to the screen. I just couldn't look away. Even when it was revealed that Raiden was a snake, I think a lot of people were thrown off by that. But that all changed in the later titles. He even got his own game, which I could talk about in another video. But after a while, Raiden's character kind of grew on me. The character development in this game was top notch, and even though the gameplay was phenomenal, it was the story that kept me hooked from start to finish. Even now, I look back at Metal Gear Solid 2 as one of my all-time favorite games. It was a game that taught me about patience, strategic thinking, and how to appreciate a well-crafted story. Not to mention, it gave me some unforgettable moments. Every time I hear the opening theme, I can't help but remember how much fun I had with the game. Sure, it was tough at times, and I may have gotten frustrated more than once, but that's the part that made it so special. Now let me tell you about Sonic Riders. That game was a whole vibe when it came out. When I first played it, I knew it was something different from all the other Sonic games that I played at the time. Instead of running at top speed on the ground, you were zooming through the air on hoverboards racing against Sonic's best known rivals and friends. The whole thing was fresh. I mean, Sonic on a hoverboard, that's next level. And the gameplay was just as exciting as the concept. Now when it came to the controls, Sonic Riders was a bit tricky to get the hang of at first. You had to master this whole boost mechanic where you fill up a special meter by pulling off tricks or collecting rings. At first, I kept running out of air mid-race and it was pretty frustrating, but once I got the hang of it, I was dominating almost every race. And not only that, each track had its own gimmick as to how you could gain air. It made each race feel different from the last. And let's talk about the characters for a second. Sonic Riders featured not just Sonic and Tails, but a whole bunch of other fan favorites like Knuckles, Amy, and even some newcomers like Storm, Jet, and Wade. Each character had their own stats and abilities, which added a fun layer of strategy to the racing. Sonic for speed, Knuckles for power, and Tails for flight. It had something for everyone, depending on your racing style. One of my favorite things about Sonic Riders was the story mode. It wasn't just about racing, it had this cool narrative where Sonic and his friends went up against the Babylon Rogues, a group led by Jet the Hawk. The plot was simple but entertaining, and it gave context to the races you were doing. The one thing I'll always remember about Sonic Riders though was how fun it was to play with friends. The multiplayer mode was intense, and it became one of those games where I'd have friends over and we'd race for hours. It wasn't just about being the fastest, but it was about hitting those perfect drifts and managing your air supply to gain an edge over everyone else. Sure, we would all get a little competitive, but at the end of the day, we were all having fun trying to one up each other. And let's be real, there's nothing better than watching your friend get wiped out at the last second and laughing at them for it. Looking back, Sonic Riders might not be the first Sonic game that comes to mind when people talk about the franchise, but it was definitely one of my favorites. It was one of those games that you could just pick up and play, and no matter how many times you raced, it was always exciting. It might have been a little underappreciated, but for me, it was a standout title on the PS2, and it's one I'll always have fond memories of. And then there was Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. If you went back and watched my older videos, you would know I'm a Dragon Ball Z fan for sure. But this game was fire. The graphics looked great for the time, and the gameplay was smooth. What really stood out to me though was the Dragon Universe mode. This wasn't just a simple story mode. It let me experience the Dragon Ball Z saga in a new way where I'm able to control different characters and fly around the map, fighting on my own terms. And the best part, you could play as the same character multiple times in different paths to unlock new characters and items. It made every playthrough feel fresh and gave me a reason to keep coming back to the game. Another cool thing was the Dragon Balls. If you managed to collect all 7 Dragon Balls, you would get Breakthrough. It lets you use all the characters' abilities, including some of the powerful moves that weren't available at the start. And let's talk about the characters. Budokai 3 had a huge roster of over 30 characters. That was perfect for someone like me who loved the show and wanted to play as many characters as possible. But what really made it fun was how different each character felt. And their transformations, oh man, turning into Super Saiyan 4 for the first time as Goku felt like a legit power boost. I could feel the difference in battle, and when I pulled off a Super Spirit Bomb or a Dragon Fist, I felt unstoppable. Plus the fact that I could switch things up and play as a completely different character kept the game fresh. Now the battles in Budokai 3 were as epic as they come. It wasn't just about mashing buttons, though you can do that, but the combat was a little bit advanced. There was a nice mix of quick moves and heavy attacks, and learning combos was the key to pulling off some crazy moves. The Dragon Rush was one of my favorite parts of the game. You get into these insane combo chains that would leave your opponents totally stunned if you actually do it right, because you have to press a button at a certain time and hope the opponent didn't press the same button as you. But besides that, every battle felt intense, and whether I was fighting against the AI or friends, it was always satisfying to land that perfect attack. And last but not least, we have GTA San Andreas. It wasn't just another action game, it was an experience. Now I didn't get to play it until a little later, but when I did, I was hooked immediately. The massive open world of San Andreas felt alive. You could do so much more than steal cars and cause chaos. You could explore, work out, get tattoos, even gamble. It was the first game I played that let me live in this world in a way that felt real. Not spend hours driving around the city taking in the sights and sounds or seeing what kind of trouble I could get into next. One of the things I loved most about San Andreas was how it made the world feel connected. You weren't just in one city. You had 3 huge cities to explore, each with its own vibe and atmosphere. You had Los Santos, San Fierro, and Los Venturas. I remember getting the bike just to cruise around Los Santos, taking in different districts, the unique neighborhoods, and even the types of different people. It felt like the game had a life of its own and I wanted to be a part of it. Of course, we can't talk about GTA San Andreas without mentioning the story. CJ, the main character, is trying to return to his old neighborhood after the death of his mother. As soon as you start the game, you're thrown into the world of gang rivalry, corruption, and personal betrayal. It wasn't just a mindless crime story though. It was a great story all throughout. I was invested in CJ's journey to take back control of his family, his neighborhood, and ultimately, his life. But let's talk about the gameplay because that's where San Andreas truly shined. The controls felt smooth, and you had many different ways to approach each mission. You could drive, fly, swim, run, or even use a jetpack. Let's just say it was a big step from previous GTA games. And don't even get me started on the fact that you could upgrade CJ's physical appearance, like getting him buff at the gym or giving him a fresh new look with tattoos and clothes. But what really got me about San Andreas was how much freedom it gave me. It wasn't just about completing the story, but it was about how I wanted to play. I could spend hours just messing around, causing chaos, or doing side missions. I could even just cruise around in the tank, destroying everything in my path. When I think back to San Andreas, it feels like one of those games that truly defined my childhood. It gave me a sense of freedom I never experienced before in a game, and the sense of freedom was what made it so memorable. To wrap this video up, the PS2 is something that's hard to forget. It set a standard for what gaming could be. Fun, immersive, and accessible to everyone. The library of games, the graphics at the time, and the sheer excitement it brought to millions is what made it more deserving of the title of the best-selling console of all time. It's crazy to think about how many memories were made thanks to this little black box. If you've never experienced a PS2 for yourself, or if you've been looking for an excuse to go back, now's the time. Pick one up and see why it gets all the love. Before you go, let me know your favorite PS2 game in the comments. Did you have one growing up, or are you discovering it for the first time? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.